recorded. Persons wishing to address the board on any agenda or non-agenda items must fill out a speaker card and email it to vbeck@sylvan.k12.ca.us. We'd like to report out of closed session that direction was given to staff on all matters. Tonight, after having more education, staff has informed me that every item that we vote on tonight, first we'll look for a motion. Second, we will look for a second. And then Velma, who just appeared beautifully on my screen, will do a roll call vote. So that will be different. So just think that our old practice of resolution roll call votes is how we will now do an actual voice vote from everyone. Again, it's not my position to disagree with other people. Everyone's got an opinion about something. I've learned since I joined this planet 58 years ago, but we'll do it that way. So at this point in time, I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Collins and a second.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Miyakawa. Roll call vote, please.
Chief Vilma.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Ra,
Aye.
and Cindy Lindsay is not present.
Okay. We do have a majority of the board voting to adopt tonight's agenda, so the agenda is passed. At this time, I would encourage all of us to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Did we pull out a closed session?
We did.
Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the Pledge of Allegiance is now being completed. At this time, we're on item 8, communications. Superintendent Hendricks, written communications.
We have no written communications, President Ra.
All right, Superintendent Hendricks or Mrs. Beck, do we have any public participation for the evening?
President Ra, we do have public participation. I've received 3. All 3 were via email. The first one is I will read them verbatim. Hello, my name is Tamisha Hill, and I have a daughter that is attending Savage Middle School. I am writing the board to let them know how disappointed I am in Savage Middle School for not giving my daughter something that she deserves like everybody else that is promoting this year. Someone needs to turn down the volume. My daughter already had lost her time to do her drama play that they worked so hard for this year. They should have been able to do so with at least giving them a promotion that they worked hard for this year. The school had ample time to try and come up with something to give their 8th grade students who worked so hard. My proposal is for them to do a parade with the students in their cars and going around the school to at least acknowledge them for their hard work this year. Then maybe next year sometime they can give them something to them that is a little better. I hope that there is something that they can do rather than to do nothing when every school district around the world is giving their students something to remember. Please reconsider this, and I appreciate you listening and giving my input into the situation. Thanks again, Ms. Hill. The second comment. Dear Sylvan Board, my name is Cynthia Facey. I am a 8th grade parent of Faith Facey. She attends Savage Middle School. Along with many other parents and students, my family is disappointed with Savage. We feel the school and district should have planned something for our 8th graders to show they care. The students have worked way too hard to get to this point in their lives to not be recognized for their accomplishment. So I am proposing that we do a car parade. We can do this by having 8th grade families decorate their cars in honor of their student. This parade can happen at the time the children were supposed to have their promotion. We could also make the students feel special by placing each student's pictures along the school gates during the parade. Then later, when the state opens from the pandemic, we could continue with a promotion celebration play date. This will give our students that they may be going to different schools a chance to say their goodbyes and get their yearbooks signed. I, along with many other parents and students, would be thrilled to help out with these events if allowed. Thank you for your time. Let's show our 8th graders we care. Again, thank you, Cynthia Facey. My third one that I'm reading will read such. On behalf of all the students, I think something should be planned for them, whether it be at a later date or a clap out car parade or something. This is a huge achievement for them and it should be recognized in some way. I completely understand that the regular activities are out, but can we all work together to think of something we can do for them so they at least feel their hard work is being celebrated and they can feel some closure on their middle school career. Thank you for your consideration, Lisa Buzik. And that's all. Those are the ones that we have received.
Thank you, Superintendent. We appreciate those parents taking the time to address the board on an important matter to them. I would normally say at this time, I'd like to pass it back to the superintendent to take this under advisement. Yeah, I know that you already have. I know there are plans. I know that we are doing something for the kids. Is that something you feel comfortable sharing at this time? So it's on the record that we are actually doing something for our 8th grade kids who are being promoted.
I have that as part of, I have that as my superintendent's report at the end of the board meeting.
Then we'll hear it at that time, but let these parents know if they're online listening to us now, which I hope they are, that we have heard you and we do have plans for your young children. And we look forward to celebrating this important milestone in their life. So we'll address that later in the meeting. At this time, we'll move on to item number 9, which is information and discussion, turning the time over to the superintendent for a superintendent update, a return to school task force.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to inform the board that we have personnel that's been identified and a group has been formed. There has been one meeting and now we're in the process of brainstorming ideas for reopening schools, which at this time, we have no direction from the state nor our county on when we would be able to open schools. I know the governor made a statement a few weeks back saying he would see that in the middle of July. However, we just had a meeting of superintendents on Monday, and Dr. V, our county health agency physician, joined us. And there's just so much uncertainty with that. So we're getting our brainstorming sessions out. We're collecting our information on a document, and we're going to be working toward whatever that may be. It's just right now with a lot of uncertainty, we're not putting a lot of emphasis into one direction until we get a little bit more guidance.
All right, thank you. At this time, we'll move on to item 9B, our 2019-2020 retiree recognition.
Good evening, Superintendent Hendricks and our Board of Trustees. This evening, we have the privilege of recognizing our district retirees. Hello, retirees who are joining us via Zoom. Special thanks to Gloria Gianosa for her communication with retirees. She even followed up with individual phone calls today to help them know how to log into Zoom so that they can participate with us virtually. We want to thank each and every one of you tonight for joining us to celebrate and honor our 2019-20 retirees. Thank you to families and friends, as well as work colleagues who have come out to support them via Zoom. We also want to acknowledge our unions and their support of our staff, including the Sylvan Educators Association and the California School Employees Association, Sylvan Chapter 73. A special thank you to Sylvan Chapter 73 for their generous donation to our retirement celebration. Even though we're not all together with our balloons and our treats and our little baby bunt cakes. We are going to be celebrating our retirees. At the end of this month, our HR staff will safely deliver to the retiree homes their retirement gifts, including an engraved vase and a retirement celebration nothing bunt cake as a token of our gratitude. Please join me in thanking our superintendent, Deborah Hendricks, for her support of our retirees. We also want to recognize and thank our Board of Trustees for championing of our employees who have provided outstanding service to our district. President George Raw, Vice President Jennifer Miyakawa, Board Member Cindy Lindsay, Board Member David Collins, and Board Member Christine Harvey. And now for the time we have all been waiting for. We will begin our retirement celebration ceremony for our retirees. The tributes that you will hear were actually written and shared by the site administrators and department supervisors. We now present our video tribute. Is there no sound? There should be sound. There should be music. No.
So when you go to share screen, there's an option that says share computer sound at the same time.
but there will be teachers throughout all the grade levels, that this will grow at greater speed with their science adoption, and they're already planning their lessons. A lot of them wrapped around that. That's the basis of what Sylvan has done, and also Somerset as well.
Okay,
I'm sure that we will be bringing back to the board as we expand this throughout the district. We'll bring back to the board a plan of how it would go forth and be implemented. So there's a strategic plan of this, and that is just not a willy-nilly thing. So we'll bring that back as an agenda item in the future as we grow and expand in this area. Lizette, if you would like to move forward with a budget update.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Raw. So I am giving a budget update for the 2021 budget. And as part of the adoption process, at this time, we prepare for the governor's May revise and for him to give us a substantial update that shapes our budget adoption and the assumptions that we use. Currently, given the circumstances with COVID, a lot of that is up in the air. And normally, when he comes out, he would be giving us a lot more information. From what we're hearing for his May revise that's going to be coming out on Thursday, we're not expecting a lot of information because the state does not have a lot of information at this time to really have a good handle on what the revenues are shaping out to be for 1920 in order for them to project 2021. Because of the tax extensions, as you may all be aware, tax extension filings were extended into mid-July. So that is the basis for about 80% of our funding in K-12. And so because of that, we are not expecting very much information. We are maybe expecting some kind of a direction, maybe seeing where we're heading for 2021. But what the other part of that is then at budget adoption, which should happen by June 15th, again, we would still not have sufficient information. And the expectation at this time and everything we're hearing is that there would then be a budget revision sometime in August or September. So it's very different because that's definitely not what we're used to. But some of what we did see in the last recession is looking at mid-year changes and making adjustments. So that's kind of setting the stage of the information and where we are. With that, we obviously still have to move forward in preparing our budget adoption, and everything we're hearing, the recommendations are for us to work on building an adopted budget with a 0% COLA. And then also to plan for additional scenarios, which I've talked about, we talked about at the last budget study. And those scenarios are a -2% COLA and a -10% COLA. And when I say COLA, it's a cost of living reduction to our revenue, to our LCFF revenue, which is our biggest source of funding. So those would be substantial reductions to our revenues that we would be expecting for the 2021 year. There's also some discussion about some impact to 1920, of which he may also mention on Thursday. Again, we don't know the extent of these at this point in time, but we will be moving forward unless we hear otherwise and planning to build our budget based on a 0% COLA. Some of the other things that we hope we may hear about at the May revise and at budget adoption that will give us an idea of how the state is planning to deal with these revenue shortfalls. And what we're hearing a lot is that they may do what they've done in the past recession and give school districts different flexibilities to be able to deal with the reduced revenues. Some of what the state is anticipating being able to do as well to help balance their budget are cash deferrals, which are essentially an IOU to school districts, which pose cash funding and cash flow monitoring concerns. And so we'll be looking at that, looking at our numbers and seeing what that translates into for us. Some of the other things that were done in the previous recession and to help mitigate some of this is some class size reduction waivers, instructional minutes adjustments. Those were just some of the different things, some flexibilities in terms of some categoricals, funding, or some required contributions to like our routine restricted maintenance. So those are all mechanisms that were used in the last recession that we anticipate learning more about in the May revise and the adoption and in the coming weeks. And that's it.
Thank you very much. And at this time, we will go on to item 9E, which is our first board policy update. Mrs. Hendricks.
Yes, the board received their packet the last meeting. And what I wanted to talk about is just to remind the board that you'll have your second reading and your adoption on June 2nd. We are asking that you send all of your questions. If you will just send them directly to me, I will make sure they get answered. And we'd like all of your questions by May 26th. It worked really well last time when we had our last packet of adopted board policies. This way, by the staff receiving them on May 26th, we're able to answer them and get them back to the board in compliance with the Brown Act.
Excellent. Thank you very much. At this time, we'll move on to item 9F, safety and facilities update.
Just a very minor update this morning at our USTAC modernization construction meeting. Boyer informed us they have started just moving into the very initial parts of phase 5, which is the last phase of the project. They're still working on wrapping up and doing work on phase 4, but with an open campus, they have that flexibility and they're working to maximize their time. And so making good progress and anticipating being able to, save some time with the ability to have an open campus. So that's it. Is there any questions?
I have one question, Lizette. I read the last memo and it said that they were a week behind schedule, and that's hard for me to understand when basically they have free run of the campus. There's no more phasing that needs to be done. Anything is available to work on. It seems to me that they should be stating that they can finish a week or two earlier, rather than why would they state they're a week late when they have free run of the campus?
No, that's a great question, Mr. Rowan. Actually, thank you for bringing that up. I did ask them that at the meeting this morning, and I forgot to mention that. They indicated that was a week behind on phase 4, but they did bring in things from phase 5 into phase 4. So they're really already starting to work on, both phases. So that week is only for the phase, and they anticipate more than making that time up at the end. So.
Okay. All right, very good. Well, thank you for that. We're going to, at this time, thank you all for your presentations under information discussion. We're going to move through our action items. If all of my board members will just kind of review, I'll call the action item. The staff member will present any information regarding it. I would ask that you put your hand up, just rather than speaking, put your hand up and wave to me. That way I'll know whether to call for a question from you. If I don't see a hand from you, then I'll call for the motion and the second, and then Velma will do the roll call vote. So I'll be looking at my screen, looking for hands up to see if anyone has a question on that item. So we're going to move to action item 10A, approval of the Memorandum of Understanding with Sylvan Educators Association regarding COVID-19. Dee Dee?
Thank you, Mr. Ra. For the agenda items 10A, 10B, 10C, and 10D, which I know will be voted on separately, I would like to address the first 4 action items as a group. as the items are related as an explanation from staff. So for agenda items 10A, 10B, 10C, and 10D, I would like to share the following. Executive Order N2620 directed our current school closure. Sylvan Union School District responded to the governor's order in response to the pandemic of COVID-19. The last weeks and months have presented staff and families with unprecedented challenges. We want to thank the collaborative and transparent.
Velma and Dee
between the
Dee
district.
are having crossover.
I'm sorry, what did he say?
There you go.
I'm sorry, Mr. Raw, our volume was off here. Could you repeat that?
I was just stating that your voice and Velma's computers were having crossover.
Okay, I think we're okay now.
We're perfect now.
Thank you for that. I apologize. We want to thank the collaborative and transparent communication between the district and its bargaining unit, Sylvan Educators Association, SEA, and California School Employees Association, CSEA, and its chapter, Sylvan 73. The abrupt closure of our schools required us to work together to quickly and decisively move into action and continue to deliver educational opportunities to our students. Despite the closing of our schools for the remainder of the 2019-20 school year, the Sylvan Union School District committed to keep students engaged in learning and connected to school through distance learning. We could not do this very important work without the dedication and work of our teachers, our administrators, our classified and support staff. At that same time, we followed the guidelines established by the county, the state, and federal agencies to secure the health and safety of our employees. Every department and every school site responded and supported our efforts. The MOUs presented for the board's approval regarding COVID-19 for both bargaining units are presented and are the result of many conversations, meetings, and ongoing communication to meet the needs of our employees while still serving our students and families. In addition, we know that we are facing difficult times ahead for school budget. We are currently waiting to receive updates, as Lisette just referenced, from the state regarding our school funding. In working with the Sylvan Educators Association, we were able to create and agree to a memorandum of understanding that will cancel the planned additional professional days for the 2021 school year. The logistics of large-scale trainings and social distancing were problematic, so the cancellation of the additional days helps us meet the current guidelines and provide some relief for the budget as we look at funding for 2021. Finally, the cancellation of the 2 additional days indicated a change on the calendar for the 2021 school year. And although we were ahead of the game initially in getting not just 1, but a 2-year calendar, our current revision makes that August 5th and October 12th are non-work days for teachers, and that is reflected on the attached calendar for the board's approval. There are no other changes to the calendar for 2021. So I present for the board's approval, and Mr. Raw, we can go through each one if you'd like. 2 MOUs regarding COVID-19, 1 MOU with SEA regarding the cancellation of the 2 additional professional development days, and finally a revised calendar for 2020-2021.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Excellent presentation. I'm looking for hands from any board members on these 4 items that we're going to be voting on. Did I see Mr. Collins' hand go up? Go ahead, Mr. Collins.
I'll make a motion to approve item 10A.
All right, so we have a motion by Mr. Collins on item 10A. I'm looking for a second.
So moved.
A second by Mrs. Harvey. Roll call vote, please.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Ross.
Aye. We have 5 ayes. The motion carries and the action is adopted. Item 10B is the approval of the Memorandum of Understanding for California School Employers Association and its Sylvan Chapter 73 regarding COVID-19. I'm looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mrs. Miyakawa. We have a second by Mrs. Lindsay. Roll call vote, please.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Ross.
Aye. And we have 5 ayes. The motion carries. The item is adopted. Item 10C is the approval of amended MOU with the Sylvan Educators Association regarding additional workdays for years 2020 through 2021. I'm looking for a motion from a board member.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mrs. Miyakawa and a second by Mrs. Lindsay. Roll call vote, please.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Ross.
Aye. We have 5 ayes. The motion carries. The item is adopted. Item 10D, approval of the revised school year calendar for years 2020 through 2021. Looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Miyakawa and a second by Mrs. Lindsay. Roll call vote, please.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Ross.
Aye, that's 5 affirmatives. The motion carries. The item is adopted. Item 10E, approval of student device insurance. Mrs. Aguilar, are you going to take this?
Yes, I am. I'm happy to take any questions that the board may have about student device insurance.
Okay, do board members have any questions? Basically, we're buying insurance for 1 month to protect us against damaged or lost items coming back as these kids are turning in their devices this year. Mrs. Miyakawa.
When would this insurance policy kick in? Is this retroactive for the whole month of May? Because as I see it, we only have, 2 weeks left of school? And essentially, it seems like we could collect our devices, tomorrow. So is this covering all of May? I'm not understanding why we need a whole month when we're about done.
It's not retroactive. It's effective from as soon as we send in payment, which we're ready to do as soon as we receive board approval. And it's for the coverage as we receive the devices, which is planned for next week, all of next week at our sites.
Right. So I'm assuming, this is an assumption, Ms. Miyakawa. I've never heard of a policy less than 30 days. So basically what they're doing is they're getting the policy in place tonight. They'll then call for the return of all those devices. This insurance policy will cover those returns if they come back damaged or missing. And hopefully that that premium will be a lot less than what it would have cost us out of pocket with missing or damaged devices that are coming back to us. I think that's the theory. Am I right on that?
Correct. Just given the, unprecedented nature of the closure and,
Right.
and the state of devices being at home, we're trying to have some coverage and protection for those, resources and those assets.
So to clarify then, I mean, they could have been damaged a month ago, but who's to say, right?
That's not really relevant. The claim would be on the day of collection. So we're basically, for lack of better terms, we're betting that this insurance policy is going to cover us. That premium of $3,700 is going to be better for us than losing a lot of devices.
And some of the concern is, damages and as well as just getting the devices back.
Right.
So both of those, there's, coverage while limited, but some coverage in light of the circumstances.
Gotcha.
All right.
Plus, it provides just an initial opportunity to have insurance like this and move forward with this type of model potentially into the next year, as we may continue to have, distance learning or just continue to have devices, going home. So we've talked some about that with Ed Services and just in terms of having that coverage and then running our own in-house program with this insurance backing, so to speak, instead of having our students go through a third party.
Plus, I think we'll learn a lot this year of what our loss ratio is going to be. Mrs. Lindsay.
Yes, Lizette, do I understand that the students will be purchasing the insurance through Sylvan? Is that what you're saying?
This insurance right now would be purchased by the district, but in the future, yes, possibly. If we were to get this coverage for the district, we would in turn then be able to offer that coverage to help offset some of this cost.
Well, that was my understanding from the beginning, was that we had something or already had something in place, didn't we? Where parents were buying their own insurance for the coverage.
They have an optional coverage that they buy through a third party.
But if you eliminate the third party, you become the third party. We can't afford it if you don't do what they were doing before.
I think what they're doing here, Mrs. Lindsay, is they're thinking that the losses on these devices are going to be high, and that the people didn't buy the insurance, and will never pay for the device either. They're just going to
Exactly.
on you. They're going to walk
Exactly.
and not do the honorable thing. I mean, your comment is well taken. It's based on a principle of morality that if you broke it, you pay for it. But there's some people out there that may just walk away and say, sorry, try to collect from me. And that's what this insurance policy that we're voting on tonight is to protect us against that, that happened to us. And we're assuming that possibly it could.
Yes, but
Am I
I
getting
was
this
wondering.
wrong, Marty?
Yeah, and actually I can tell you that of the 3,000 devices we have out there, we only had less than 300 families that actually purchased the insurance.
So do we not make that mandatory?
No, we can't.
I don't understand that. I don't understand.
Yeah, so basically we have 2,700 devices at risk
Mhm.
for a loss.
Correct.
If we lose 10% of them, that's 270 devices times, what is it, Marty? $200 a piece, are they?
Roughly. Mhm.
Okay, so there you go. What is that? $100 is 27 for $5,400. Our premium is $3,700, so we'd be head by maybe what, $2 grand or so. So.
Correct.
But if our loss ratio is 1%, then we bought insurance that we didn't need. And that's what the insurance company is betting on. They think they know the statistics better than us. So they're making that bet that it will be a low loss ratio.
I'm going with the insurance company.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's item, which is item 10E, which is the insurance policy to cover us for a month on our handheld devices.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mrs. Harvey and a second.
I'll second.
A second by Mr. Collins. Roll call vote, please.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa, Board President Roth,
Aye. Ms. Miyakawa, you are muted. I'm assuming you voted yes.
Sorry, yes, I muted.
Okay, so we have 5 yeses. The motion carries. The item is adopted. You can buy the insurance. All right, item 10F is the approval of Safer Excess Liability Insurance. Mrs. Aguilar.
Yes, this is an item as a follow-up to what was brought to you in December to purchase. Safer is the name of the excess liability insurance carrier. And we had previously purchased this from Self for many years, but we were anticipating an option of potential savings in moving with Safer, which is offered through Keenan NCR, who we have our property and liability from now. And so in fact, the renewal rates are significantly lower through Safer and would be savings to the district of about 64,000 over those self-renewal rates for 2021. And so it is a recommendation to move to safer excess liability insurance coverage for 2021.
Okay, looking for questions from board members? Seeing none, looking for a motion to approve item 10F.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Harvey, and a second?
I'll second.
A second by Mr. Collins. Roll call vote, please.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Roth,
Aye. That's 5 yeses. The motion carries. The item is adopted. We're moving on to item 10G, which is the approval of the science textbook adoption from Amplify Science K-8.
Yes, good evening. So it is my pleasure to bring forward the recommendation from the Sylvan Science Adoption Committee that has worked for the better part of the past 12 months to prepare and to identify the most appropriate recommendation for consideration for the science adoption cycle, which is upon us. And so tonight I bring forward the item for consideration of the board for Amplify Science for grades kindergarten through 8th grade.
Okay, so looking for board questions. I just want to see some hands. I just gonna see who's going to question. So we have Miyakawa, Harvey, Raw, and is Lindsay or Collins going to have questions?
I'll just have a comment, no
I don't
question
know
for
whether to call on
clarification.
you. Just raise your hand if I'm going to call on you.
So, Ms. Raw, I only have a comment. I don't have a question.
Okay, it looks like I'm going to scroll through all the board members. I'm going to start off with Miyakawa first, then Harvey, then Lindsay, then Collins, and then Raw. And if we need to go through another round, we will. But let's go in that cycle, starting off with Miyakawa.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Raw. Make sure I'm on. Okay. Just a couple follow-up questions. I pulled our old MYPs to see where we stand. It said that this is going to be paid with instructional materials and lottery funding. And according to what I was able to find, we've got this money in the bank to buy the $2.6 million textbook adoption, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
This is planned for. So we have been putting money aside in preparation for the
Right, and I knew that, and I knew that you'd also thought, I mean, we'd even estimated it being up to 3 million, so it was a nice cost savings for us as well. So,
Right.
and according to what you said in your board update, we'll have all the materials for all 8 years,
Correct.
all the consumable, okay.
Correct.
My second question had to do with, I thought this was mentioned before, but I couldn't quite remember, in terms of matriculating up into Modesto City. This will be a nice, do we know what they're adopting, or are they not there yet?
So we, most of the areas around us adopted about a year ago, or they are, some of our high schools are adopting currently. So I'm somewhat familiar with their 912 continuum, but I couldn't speak to the fact or to whether this program is going to be a perfect mirror or a perfect companion. It is not my understanding that Amplify is part of their adoption process or part of their recommendation for adoption for textbooks. They have gone with other publishers, but some of that is because some of their adoptions are unique to chemistry. It's unique to biology, right? It's not a comprehensive science program. So I wouldn't be able to speak to, whether or not this is, like I said, a perfect companion. But in terms of what the committee's work was, they felt that this was the strongest contender in approaching the science standards in all of the grades through elementary and middle school. So they felt like it best suited the standards that we're responsible for.
We only have so much control over what.
Correct.
I mean,
Correct.
we have no control actually, but
Correct.
it is nice that both of them, that we could align for both middle and elementary. For us, that's great because that will transition nicely.
And Mrs. Miyakawa, it is always the intention of the textbook adoption committee that we match standards in our grade levels. And if we can provide our students with the ability to master and become proficient in their grade level standards, the matriculation goes much smoother regardless of what the content area is, whether that's ELA, math, or science, or social studies.
Okay, thank you. My last question just has to do with training. I did read in our update that training would begin before the end of the year, which I assume is right now. How are we able to do that? I mean, this is just another big problem dumped on your little lap on how to do this in this current situation. I mean, hand science is very hands-on.
Yeah.
How are we going to do this training, and when is that taking place?
So the training is scheduled to take place next week. As soon as the committee had made their recommendation, we were already starting to talk about the professional learning that was going to be attached to this, and we had some preliminary plans in advance of the board's, right, their approval to move forward. But in light of COVID, we, with the publisher, we started working really early on to say, okay, what are the options for us? How can we still do training? So like everything, it will be virtual. We are not the first district to engage in this. In fact, Amplify Science, their trainers have been doing this for the last several weeks with other districts that have also adopted, or they've adopted a year ago and they're in the process of implementation. So they've worked out a lot of the kinks. And so we will be doing this virtually starting next week.
Okay. And how many days of training do we have with them?
We have a full week of training because we are doing it in grade level spans. So we have a 2-hour virtual training for kindergarten, first grade, and so on, all the way up through middle school.
And then will they meet and teacher teams after that in terms of that piece of it, the collaboration?
Well, that's going to take us the better part of the week. And our goal of that training is to introduce the materials to teachers so that they are not waiting until July before they first see them. So our goal was to try to get some information out to them, at least launch the program, do an introduction. It's not the same as in person. Nothing is, but we think this is a good attempt. It's a fair attempt to be able to at least launch the program so that there is some understanding before we actually start the school year.
Very good. Thank you very
With
much.
follow-up training too, I will say we have follow-up training scheduled for next year. That's part of our purchase. And it's certainly part of the commitment from the publisher with our district.
Is that training usually hands-on? I mean, would this have been a hands-on training or?
This would have been, yes, this is taking place of an in-person training, but in light of the additional days at the beginning of the year, there were several factors. So we had to do this virtually. We don't have a full day to dedicate to it. So this is a little bit of a combination of all of those factors taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mrs. Harvey, you're up.
Hi, thank you. I just was hoping you could kind of clarify with me. I'm sort of familiar with this program, but I wanted you to kind of share what's the learning curve on this? Is it a pretty steep learning curve, or are the science shy teachers gonna dig it, or what are your thoughts?
Sure. So it was the indication early on by the committee that there's a steep learning curve for all of this because the next generation science standards are complex and they're so much different than what we were accustomed to. Now, I love the term you use, science shy. One of the considerations of the committee was to what degree could a science shy, I'm going to use your term, a science shy teacher teach science with a high degree of efficacy. And it was clear after the adoption process and the piloting phases that Amplify allowed teachers, even if they had personal limited experience, I'm talking elementary, not as much in our content areas, but if they had limited experience with some of the science concepts and some of that conceptual understanding, could they still teach science? Could they still understand it? And could students still benefit from that? And were the necessary supports in place for the teachers? And Amplify scored very, very high in that area. And it was the feedback from the committee that it provided a great deal of scaffold and support for teachers in order to be able to appropriately and effectively teach the science content.
Great. And then my other question is how is this working? How about special ed?
So as I mentioned in the Friday update that our middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade mild mod students will be mainstreamed into our science courses for opportunities to engage with the science. And we're also looking at mainstreaming opportunities in the elementary grades as well.
And the special ed teachers who are part of this, or teachers who are familiar with special ed, felt that this was also a good program for those type of learners?
Yes, we had
Fantastic.
a class teacher that served on the committee. She was a very valuable resource to have, and she talked and spent a lot of time evaluating it through the lens of how were her students able to access the material. And again, her commentary was also very positive and in favor of Amplify Science in order for allowing those students to access the curriculum.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Harvey. Mrs. Lindsay, you're up.
Okay, well, you're not gonna like what I have to say, board, but I have a problem. Laura, could you tell me how much of the general fund we're going into to cover the complete cost of this program?
So these monies are set aside and out of the instructional materials fund and the restricted lottery fund. So those have already been earmarked out of the general fund.
How much are they? How much is it?
It's on the board agenda, and let me have my, it is 2.6 million, roughly 2.66, $2,666,613.
Okay. Now, this money is going to have to be tapped to be able to cover the money because we don't get enough from the lottery, right?
I think, let me see if I understand your question. So this money is set aside monies each year that we set aside out of the general fund into the instructional materials fund to be put toward the purchase of textbook adoptions.
Exactly. But from that money, how much of that money is coming from the general fund as a not part of that money that comes in from the lottery? In other words, the money from the lottery is supposed to be used for the textbooks. And I realize that we're going to have to go into our general fund, which is that money we've set aside. And what I'm asking is how much out of that are we going to have to take? All of it or a portion of it or what?
Okay, so I think I understand what you're asking. We set aside $450,000 every year into the instructional materials adoption. So that money has been accumulating, and that's what we will pull from. There has been, and I mentioned it in the Friday update, and let me pull that out. There has been also some additional one-time monies that have come in that have gone towards the textbook adoption as well. And so those monies have also gone towards increasing that money from the general fund into the instructional materials. The restricted lottery amount, I can't speak to how long that has been in accumulation and how much has gone each year towards that amount. We will be using a portion of that restricted lottery money for this purchase. And that has happened in the past as well when we have done textbook adoptions.
Okay, and that's what I'm asking because we're in a crisis. The state's in a crisis. School districts are in a crisis. And I know that money's been set aside for the adoption of this different math, science, whatever. But we have also a certain amount of money that comes each year specifically for the books out of the lottery money. What I'm trying to say is, are we going to be putting our own budget in danger by spending that money on books and then scrambling to find money that we might have been able to use out that other money, that lottery money, or that, not lottery, but that textbook money that we've been setting aside? I guess what I'm saying to you is, are we sort of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul?
I think I understand your question. Your concern is that we would spend this money out of instructional materials and restricted lottery when in fact maybe it should be moved back to offset some of the general fund expenditures.
Exactly.
Okay, so hang on. I'm going to see if Lizette can chime in and offer any other insight into that. I hear your question and your concern, but I'm going to ask Lizette to jump in on the budgeting part of that and how this money has been already accounted for in advance in preparation of textbook adoption, the textbook adoption site.
Well, I understand all that. There's no reason for you
Okay.
to do that. I understand all that. All I'm asking you is, in essence, that money that's been set aside, it could be used to help Sylvan School District in other ways besides the adoption, right?
No, not all of it would be able to. Once
Not
it's
all of it, but part of it could be. Could be.
Let me,
figure for you.
I think we're kind of going in circles here. Let me see if I can be of help.
Okay.
And if I'm not, just say you're not helpful, George.
Okay.
According to the adopted budget in June 30th of 2019, there was approximately, and I'm rounding it to keep our numbers easy to read, approximately $2 million in restricted textbook line item money. And on the unrestricted sheet was about $2.2 million. When you add them together, you're at about 4.2 million. So what I think what you're saying is on the restricted sheet, you got 2 million for textbooks. On the unrestricted, we have earmarked 2.2 million for textbooks for a total of 4.2 million. I think what Mrs. Lindsay is talking about is that 2.2 million on the unrestricted sheet. How much of that is available to use for other items besides textbooks? I think that's your question, but if
That's
I'm
my
wrong,
question.
you can
That's my
try
question.
something else.
That's my question, Mr. Raw. I realize that it's unrestricted. I realize we're going into it. I'd like to know how much we're going into it and what could that money be used in lieu of all the things that we're going to probably have to be cutting.
So is
It's difficult.
question
Sorry,
and
you have to
answers or
remember to
what?
unmute every time. Sorry about that.
No problem. Go for it.
So, Mrs. Lindsay, to give you an exact answer, we're going to have to, I mean, we can't do that. We can't do that without getting the books and really looking deeply. But as Mr. Raw already stated, there's money that you approved in restricted money that's set aside to purchase this textbook adoption. There is a portion that will be coming from the unrestricted. So if you take the difference of what the restricted was, subtract it from this, there is some money, and not a lot though, but there is some. So then you're talking about the leftover amount from the unrestricted. And so that money, each year the board has made a plan to set aside for textbooks because an adoption goes in an 8-year cycle. And so just because we're doing science tonight, they're already thinking about math in the near future. So we have to continue to build up that account so we're ready when we have to come up for the next adoption. Unless, like what happened for several years, when the economy was in recession, the state decided not to push out an adoption. So there were many, many years that we've gone. In fact, some of our curriculum, especially science and math, is very, very old because of those years in that recession time.
Okay, that's basically, I guess what I'm trying to know is if there's going to be any money, and that money you're already earmarking it for math, not being able to be used in any other way, right?
The board can make a decision how they want to use that money, but yes, as a rule, the board has always set aside a set amount of money every year for curriculum, textbook adoptions.
Okay, thank you.
All right, very good. Mr. Collins, you're up.
Thank you. I would just like to say that I did have the opportunity to be in a 4th grade classroom while some of this curriculum is being piloted and tested, and it seemed really fantastic. Students were exploring, they were engaged, they were trying a variety of different things. I appreciate what's said here that the curriculum, the science curriculum especially, is very old and it has been quite a while. This is something that's absolutely needed, and I was encouraged by what I saw students students engaging in the classroom. So I want to say thank you to the adoption committee that did a really tremendous job and a ton of work, because you don't just explore one set of curriculum, you explore a variety of curriculums and the pros and the cons, and make a recommendation based on the student experience. So it is a lot of work. And I would like to say just thank you to them for making that happen and giving us a really good recommendation. Thank you.
Mr. Collins, you are correct in that the current science adoption or the current science materials we have, we can no longer find as replacements. They're no longer in print. That's how old they are.
Very good.
They're vintage.
You know,
Yeah.
all of your thoughts and your comments and questions are very insightful, and I really appreciate that. I would also like to echo Mr. Collins. I know there's a lot of time and effort that go into an adoption, and I am very appreciative of all of the staff who have taken their time and extra effort to go through this. And I cannot thank you enough. I will share with Mrs. Lindsay made a couple of good points about we're kind of in tough budget times, and if we weren't in tough budget times, you know, I probably wouldn't be thinking, how do I want to say it, in different divergent directions. But there are a couple of things that are of concern. Not anything with the adoption, the quality of the material. I went online and looked at it, taking the recommendations of staff and teachers. None of that is my concern. My concern is on two fronts, is just the sheer cost of this, and two, the duration of it. The 8-year duration of locking into such a long contract is a concern. And I probably just would have waved that concern by under normal circumstances. But let me just throw a thought out to you that, and I'm not pretending to prophesy here to you in any way, but we have gone through something extraordinary, and we've asked teachers to basically do something impossible because the curriculum isn't designed to be distance education. We use a term, and have been using a term for the last 2 months, called distance education. I come from an industry that actually did distance education, and distance education and what we're doing is not distance education. When you are in distance education, you're not only doing the curriculum, but you're doing direct instruction and a lot of things. I know we're recording videos, all the assessments are done online. Times are monitored. Documents are shared in and out of the portals. There's this whole world of distance education. And when you actually go through accreditation on the collegiate level, they divide distance education from regular instruction. In fact, accreditation teams that come out to sites, they're different accreditation teams because they're so different. So why am I sharing this with you? There's the distinct possibility that we will go into a distance education mode, or either family will love the idea of home education or whatever that is. Why I'm sharing this and what my concern is that this curriculum, should we adopt it over an 8-year period, which is a distinct possibility, even though it has an online capability to it, it's not distance education. And it doesn't have all the components of distance education. So what I'm worried about is that will the state in a 12-month period of time turn around and require of all the manufacturers of textbooks to add a true distance education component? And will we be adopting something tonight that we're in year 1 in, and we have to pay for the distance education mode for it, that will be adopted a year or 2 years from now, yet we're locked into this 8-year model? That's a lot of explanation for why can we not buy a contract for 4 years or 3 years or 5 years? Why does it, I know the duration of textbook adoption at the state level is 8 years. I get that. But what I don't understand is why are we locked into an 8-year model, and how are they able to do that? And if they do have that power, is it because it's the power of monopoly that they're playing and forcing us into that? And we're going to be locked into an 8-year agreement that we sign, and it will have no true distance education component in it. Is a little scary to me. So I don't know. I wrote these questions out to you earlier. I asked for a response, but I kind of prepared you ahead. Hopefully you might be able to address my concerns so I can support on this action item.
I'm happy to. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
So yes, you are correct. The true definition of distance learning and remote learning and distance education, and is it synchronous, is it asynchronous, all of those are factors. And you are correct. Our teachers have certainly responded and in these times and responded well to what was really impossible to even imagine several months ago, right? And so when you think about forward thinking about what could be and what might happen, it is true that there may be an opportunity in the near future where we are called to look at education and schooling much differently. To your point, though, none of our materials are totally 100% aligned to distance education. None of them are. Our math is not, our social studies is not, that we just adopted last year, and neither is our ELA adoption from 2015. We are making the most and making the best use out of what we do have available to us for adoption and consideration. And we would continue to do that as we move forward. To your point about the 8-year cycle, yes, these adoptions work in an 8-year cycle. So if the state were to come back in 2 to 3 years, as you mentioned, they wouldn't be able to come back and require a different set of something for science, because that adoption cycle is not going to happen again until 2024. At that time, the state will review the standards and they will review the alignment to the standards, and they'll create a new framework. In 2024, when science is up for that, they'll make adjustments. They will go out to publishers at that time and say, hey, here's what we're looking for in terms of alignment to our textbooks. You need to write to that, submit to that, and the State Board of Education will determine whether or not you meet the threshold for consideration. So science won't come up again until 2024. The next adoption cycle that will occur is math, and we're about 2 years out from that. That framework is under construction right now, and publishers are already starting to respond to some degree, but the framework hasn't been finalized. Publishers can't get too far ahead of this work, because if the framework comes out with something different, they have to go back and start all over again. So they try to work within what the State Board of Education puts out to be responsive. But until that framework is adopted and the call for publishers goes out, they don't want to get too far ahead of it for obviously business purposes. So while we can't predict the future, we do adopt in 8-year cycles for the cost savings of that. If we were to adopt a year at a time, or let's say we pick the adoption, we adopt for the 8 years, but we only decide to purchase materials on a year-to-year basis, your cost for that is incredibly increased by doing that. Because if you purchase on the front end for the life of the adoption, you receive significant discounts for the life of the adoption. You receive multi-year discounts on the consumables. You receive multi-year discounts on the licensing and the subscriptions. So it behooves a district to look for the whole span of the cycle, knowing that there won't be another opportunity for new science curriculum to be written and produced and provided until 2024. Most districts, and certainly that is our consideration, is to look at the span of the 8 years and say, this fits our needs for the 8 years. Now, if we were to have to, move to a complete 100% distance learning platform, we'd have to use what we have available to us, just like we're doing with ELA, just like we're doing with social studies, and just like we're doing with our current math, because none of those are written toward the call of the state to do something that's 100% distance learning.
So you're not sure we don't know what the cost would be if we did a 4-year or a 5-year. I mean, do they not even offer that?
Not really.
Us and lay out. I know that they're trying to sell you. It's kind of like when you're buying a car, you finally get in there and, they only give you 30 days to buy the extended warranty. And if you don't buy it then it costs whatever. I understand the sales thing, and they have a lot of power because they have a monopoly. But I never thought the governor would tell me I can't walk out my house without a mask on either. So that governor just probably has the power to say every publisher will create a distance learning component and they'll just pass the costs on to the district. So, I mean, I truly hope and believe that we won't have to do something for 8 years, but I mean, I never thought I'd have to do half the stuff I'm doing in the past 60 days.
And Mr. Raw, I've been doing textbooks adoptions for a long time, and even in the Sylvan District, even years and years ago.
Yeah.
The last 2 math adoptions ago, I worked with Mrs. Gosman on that. So I've been doing this for a long time, and I have to tell you that in the more recent years, the textbook adoption cycle looks a little bit different with publishers and what they provide. It isn't the same as it used to be, where you used to be able to configure different packages. We saw this certainly in the ELA adoption. It is the package. This is how the publisher presents it. This is the package. And there was very few piecemeal options to that, which has actually, been unfortunate in some ways, because there have been times when we wanted to just add additional pieces. Can we get 3 of these? It's incredibly difficult to do that because publishers just don't operate like that, like they used to. And there's also some very strict laws around how much negotiation can happen. They have to set a purchase price and they stick with that purchase price so as to avoid any accusations by districts that some districts got a different pricing versus other districts. Obviously, there would be some serious ramifications of that. So the packages are the packages, and they are very transparent with those price points. With me, I can see right away what we're looking at, which is why I can anticipate costs for adoption as we go forward into the adoption cycle. The only flexibility we really had was with the middle school. The middle school had the option of a consumable or the hardbound textbook, and then you would have to have a consumable companion with that in addition to. That was really the only option we had to look at to say, what do you want to choose? Everything else was standard issue. This is the set, here's the package, this is what you purchase.
Okay, thank you. Lizette, can you, I'm going to just I just want to understand this because I'm a little worried about the money, and I'm trying to support Mrs. Granger in her position and that, and be a team player. This whole thing is making really uncomfortable, the cost and the duration. But so if we bought the 2.66 million, would I understand from an accounting position that we would use up essentially the 2 million in restricted funds first, and then that remaining 700,000 would come out of the unrestricted pile, leaving approximately 1.4 million left in that? Is that how you would do the accounting in this transaction, or would it be different than that?
Sorry, we're just unmuting myself. Yes, I would make that assumption that that's how we would account for that, because we want to use up the most restricted balance first.
Okay, so then that $1.4 million, even though over the past several years at 400 and some thousand a year, would we legally be able to use that money for something other than textbooks should the board get put in a tight spot and we need to? I'm not suggesting we're doing that. I'm not making any budget decisions. I'm just saying, would we have the flexibility if it came to really tough decisions to pull that money back out of the unrestricted side back into the general fund for use for other things? Is that a possibility?
Yes, because those are funds that are unrestricted and have been set aside under the board's direction.
Okay, all my questions have been answered. I'll see a hand. I'll take hands from any other board members. I see one from Mrs. Lindsay and not from any others. So I'll now recognize Mrs. Lindsay.
Okay. I had a conversation I wanted to share with the board with Mrs. Hendricks and Mrs. Granger today. One of my concerns is that for many months and years, I think we've asked what the state's position is as far as the funding for technology in the purchase of books that, our Chromebooks, our iPads, and we really haven't found out anything. And as I mentioned to them, I believe it's a monopoly by the publishing companies because they don't have to compete with technology, but we have to provide technology. And so I just wanted to share with the board that I think this is something that we need to really consider pursuing as it not only as a board, but as an area. I'm meeting tomorrow with the Region 8, which concludes Amador, Calaveras, Merced, San Joaquin, and Stanislaus, to discuss with a regional director the possibility of CSBA backing us as school board members in loosening up some of that lottery money, and also loosening up the money that is going in the restricted to be able to be used towards some of our computer issues also. Because right now you're talking about distance learning, and we know what distance learning means. It means computers, it means laptops, it means iPads, it means all kinds of things, and we don't have any funding. So I would encourage Laura to continue to pursue that questioning from the State Board of Education and find out what their position is in it, and see where we as school board members can head with CSBA and in securing some funding for us in that area. So this is my concern, is that we're being asked to purchase books, but we're going way over into technology. And I'm not advocating not having books. You know me, I love books. But I also believe that some of that money should be being spent on Chromebooks and iPads and things like that. So I just wanted to share that with my board, because I think it's something that if it doesn't happen right away, it's going to be happening down the road. And I know you don't listen to old fogies very much, but this is a promise. This is coming. And if we don't get CSBA and all of our school boards behind it, we're going to see less lottery money coming in and more demands of money of spending. So I want to share that with you.
Thank you. Looking for any other hands on this item? All right, well, Mrs. Granger, let's see if you can get some people to go your direction, all right? Very good. So I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's agenda item 10G, which is the approval of the science textbook adoption Amplify Science K-12.
So moved.
For $2.66 million. We have a motion by Mrs. Harvey.
I will second.
Mr. Collins is giving a second to the motion, and we'll do a roll call. Oh, there you go, Velma. You moved on my screen. Did you go out for a snack or something? It just popped over there. I don't know. Okay, sorry, a little background, little computer humor. All right, there you go.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Well, since I have a scientist daughter that teaches science, high school, high science, I would probably be shot if I didn't say aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Ross,
Aye. You have 5 votes to adopt. And at this time, the motion carries and the adoption is complete. A special thank you to your team, Mrs. Granger. Thank you for keeping the board updated in Friday updates. That was extremely helpful. And please send out a thank you of appreciation to your whole team for all their good work.
I will do that. I'm very proud and I'm happy to share that with them. Thank you so much.
Very good. Item 10H is adopt resolution 1920, number 27, grading during emergency school closures. Mrs. Granger.
Yes, and actually, if I may, President Raw, I'd like to just do a little bit of an intro into the three items that I have that are coming forward: the resolution on grading, and then also the board policy as it relates to distance learning and working remotely. These are sort of a package, if you will, because these are all in response to the COVID-19 school closures. These policies and this resolution was put forward by CSBA, but certainly the policy on emergency grading represents our commitment to hold students harmless due to the school closures. And then the other two policies that follow on working remotely and distance learning basically summarize what we have already done and put forward in the interim of the school closure. It just actually puts it into policy so that we have that recorded, but it is exactly the steps that we follow to ensure the continued learning of our students and to ensure the ability of our certificated staff to work remotely.
Very good. Looking for hands. Only one set of questions. Yeah, I see you, Mrs. Lindsay. All right. Okay, so Mrs. Miyakawa, Mrs. Lindsay. Let's start with Mrs. Lindsay and then go to Mrs. Miyakawa.
Just a quick question. Mr. Raw, you may be able to help me with this. Don't we have a policy in place telling us how we adopt policies? I'm not sure that we can adopt this policy. We can have it as a first reading, but I'm not sure we can adopt it tonight.
Can do that.
Mrs. Hendricks, did you want to chime in?
Mrs. Lindsay, I can address that. So typically on board policy revisions that we do get from CSBA, you're right, we bring for first, second, but we have in the past brought policies because of, let's call it somewhat of an emergency situation, to the board to read and adopt at that time. And so you are correct that generally when we're just looking at revising or adopting something that CSBA is requesting, it is in that format, but we have followed this format in the past for more of an emergency type situation. And we have grade 2 now, so it is an emergency.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. What?
Our report cards are ready to go out. And so we have grading in process right now. So this is an emergency.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we were following our policy on policies.
Mrs. Lindsay, I understand exactly what you're saying. And the answer is we normally do. This had extenuating circumstances, especially the grading one, that we wanted to have that policy adopted as these grades or lack of grades that are going out, and how we're moving forward with that. So Mrs. Miyakawa.
Before you go.
Yes.
I would like that policy brought back to us for amendment so that we can be sure that if we do have this come up that is in our policy stating that we can adopt a policy under an emergency situation.
I don't that we don't have a policy. That we have a best practices.
Are you sure? That's what I'm asking.
Well,
is there a separate policy, Mrs. Hendricks? I don't recall one. I know it's best practices because I remember being on this board when we used to have 3 readings rather than 2 readings. I think we're in a best practices mode, aren't we? Or correct me if I'm wrong.
We are not aware of a policy that states how you adopt a policy. We will look for that. But this resolution, thank you, Mrs. Granger, also states that it's an act of an emergency. So that's why
I'm not questioning this. I'm going to vote for it.
Oh, I know.
I'm just saying that if we do have a policy on how we adopt a policy, we need to come back and amend it with this in it.
Okay, we'll
That's
look
all
at
I'm saying.
So we're going to move forward with it, but we'll have them look. If you could put that on your yellow sticky for us, Velma, and just see, make sure we're compliant. If we're out of compliance with what we're doing tonight, we'll bring it back for another vote. But tonight we'll move forward. Mrs. Miyakawa, your questions.
Ms. Granger brought up all 3 of them. I've got a question on each of them. Would you like me to just do the grading one right now though?
I want you to do all three of them now. We're just doing them as a bundle.
Okay, so my question on grading is probably not one that you can adequately answer right now, but I'd like us to have this conversation in the future. Is this whole premise behind, and this particular resolution is timed 2019-20. The whole premise behind being held harmless is what we're basing it on. But even as of today, I read on Facebook, someone said that the UCs are now saying that learning in the fall will be remote, which is so heartbreaking to me, who has a senior daughter. So my question is, what is the conversation like next year? Because the whole premise behind the not grading and the extreme challenge that's been as a parent to try and get your kids to complete schoolwork when it's only improving a grade, right? And I've heard this all over the place. And at first I was one of those parents saying, hey, it's optional, but in our home it's not optional. Well, that's great talk, but it's very, very, very difficult. And I'm hearing this all over the place. So my question to you is, and we'll probably have to have this at a later date, is if, God forbid, we have to do this again in the fall, what does grading look like? And in conjunction with that, I'd like to hear kind of how, we're talking about distance learning in a minute. What has distance learning looked like for our special ed population, and for our special staff, like our counselors and our SLPs, and what does that look like for their role? And then, hold on, what was the other one? Oh, working remotely. I'm going to save that one just for a minute, but I do want to also mention really quick, since we're talking about this, that I also, since none of us have children in the district, I reached out to 5 different friends today and I asked them for their feedback on how distance learning has gone for them, and they have kids in both elementary and middle. Overwhelmingly very positive reports back for our staff. And I just want that out there. I don't know how this is going. I know how it's going for my kids, but not in our district. And I just want that out there, that parents, the ones I've talked to, are super appreciative for the outreach this happened, for the professionalism, for the phone calls, for the emails, for all the work that's gone into making this successful. Very positive. And I was just thrilled to hear that. I kind of held my breath when I threw it out there, and just all of them came back positive. So I did want to mention that as well. But if you could touch on the grading, if we have to look at this in the future, and how that looks for our special ed population as we move forward.
Sure, I'm happy to. And yes, I'm not surprised that that's the sentiment out in the public. I've had the good fortune of working with our teachers, our counselors, our special ed staff in getting this up and off the ground, and it's tremendous. And they should, all of them, every single one of them, be commended to the highest level for what they've been able to pull off in such a short time. So proud and to be affiliated with such a high caliber of folks committed to learning. So with that, grading, let me jump into that. So grading, yes, this resolution is a stopgap measure because we have to report on grades for the remainder of the year. So this resolution will take us through certainly the period of the emergency order issued by Governor Gavin Newsom. So it references that specifically. When we return in the fall, or if we were not able to return in the fall, I mean, so many of these things are up in the air, and we're waiting for guidance, and we're all in the same boat. We all share in the wondering of what will happen and what will be. Yes, grading, if we were to continue with distance learning, remote learning, what would grading look like? And we are having conversations about that. But to be honest with you, we have to have some guidance from the state on whether or not this would be compulsory education. Currently, this is not. And that is why that districts are responding as such, especially elementary districts. And I don't want to repeat everything that's been in my Friday update, but we are in a unique circumstance as a K-8 district as opposed to a 9-12 system where there has to be some credit recovery for the conferment of a diploma. That is not our situation. And so grading is a topic of conversation, but we will have to have some direction from the state on whether or not we will have to account for attendance. Will we be recording that? And of course, the state can't answer that until they assure that every child has access, equal access to online learning platforms. If everything is going to go online, we will have to ensure that every kid has a device, and there has to be some accounting of how they have Wi-Fi. We can't have access be a factor that prevents kids from being able to learn. And so I will tell you that Mrs. Hendricks and I are both filling out surveys for the California Department of Ed on a regular basis. These are questions we're being asked to respond, because to be in the simplest of terms, the state of California is trying to figure it out. And until such time, we are wondering, we are planning, we're doing lots of brainstorming and contingency planning, but the grading conversation will have to come back around depending upon what the landscape looks like for distance learning. And we know that already. We know that going into it. In regards to distance learning, who's involved and what they're doing, the answer to that is every certificated staff member is involved. We have our nurses providing outreach. We have our counselors, our mental health clinicians providing outreach. Every single certificated staff member has been connecting with kids. That was the charge in the beginning, and it continues to be the charge now. Let's connect with kids. Let's check in on their well-being. Let's make sure that they are intact and whole and cared for, and that they know that school still cares for them. That was always our primary concern. So that continues, and everyone has a role in that for sure. In terms of your question about working remotely, and well, you said something else about working remotely. Did you table that? You wanted to wait on that?
Yeah, I guess my question about that, because it's oh yeah, I thought I was muted again. My question with that was, I couldn't figure out why we were establishing this. I mean, because we'd already voted on the MOUs previously to deal with this year. So I guess my question is, why are we making this an official policy? And along with that, when would it be? Well, my question, when would this be applicable in an educational setting apart from the current one we're in? Meaning, when would we ever ask someone to? In education, how would working remotely ever be a situation we need to broach, I guess?
So both of these, like I said, are in response to the executive order and the school closure. So CSBA, it takes some time to filter through that language and draft policy and see what's already in place. And so this was the response to the school closure. This is the emergency circumstances, unprecedented times, and this is the response to this. So that language is specifically written towards addressing this period of time. And I know that it is a little bit late if you look at the sequence, because again, we've been doing this for 8 weeks or 7 weeks or whatever the case may be. So we are in fact putting in place things that have already been executed, because this wasn't available to us in advance of that. So it is simply a response to the circumstances and the executive order.
Okay. I think that's all my
Very
questions.
good. All right, so let's go ahead, and I'm looking for, on 10H, a motion to adopt Resolution 1920, number 27, grading during emergency school closures.
Mr. Roth,
Yes, Mrs. Lindsay.
I do have one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, Mrs. Granger, is with the no mark at the end, are for the third trimester, will the total of the first two be what grade they pass forward with?
So what will be indicated for all of our students in kindergarten through 8th grade, actually TK too, because we don't have a period of assessment that we would normally have in the spring, we will indicate that there was no mark. So there's no punitive measure at all. For a specific group of students, and I reference this in my Friday update, we have some students who currently are enrolled in 8th grade math honors course that allows them to obtain algebra credit once they get to high school. Those students will be, their grade for that algebra consideration upon the successful completion of their next course in high school, their trimester 1 and 2 grades will be average. So I've already worked that language out in that those next steps with Modesto City Schools for our kids. But other than that, every child in the Sylvan District will have an NM for no mark due to COVID-19.
For the whole year?
Just for the third trimester, we were fortunate, well, not that anybody was fortunate, so let me be careful with that. But in terms of when this occurred and when our school closure occurred, it occurred almost simultaneously with the third trimester. So as opposed to other districts where this fell in the third or fourth, and it affects the quarter and the semester, we don't have that issue. We have just the third grading period that was primarily affected for the duration of that third trimester. So it will be no mark for the third trimester only.
Yeah, I understood that. I just wanted to know if you were averaging the first and second together for a total grade.
No, we don't have averages of like quarters on a semester system. Since we are a trimester system, each of those trimesters is a standalone grading period. There's no averages for a total year-end grade. You would just see on the report card a trimester 1 summative grade, a trimester 2 summative grade, and a no mark for trimester 3.
How do you know whether they pass to the next grade? That's how I want to. If you didn't pass 1 and you didn't pass 2, and you get a no mark for the third one, do you pass?
Yes, unless there was a circumstance that was addressed on a case-by-case basis with an individual student, every student in the Sylvan District will be promoted to the next grade.
And that's CSBA's recommendation?
Mrs. Lindsay, that was dealt with back in the John Halverson days. We fought that battle. Do we promote kids or not promote kids? Can we hold kids back from high school or not? It was determined clear back in John Halverson days that every single child, regardless of their grade, will be promoted from the Sylvan District to Modesto City Schools. That is the current practice.
No, I wasn't thinking so much about our 8th graders, but okay. I just feel
That was
I feel
a
bad
long
for
time
the.
ago.
I
I'm
have
not
to
saying
just
I
say-
agree with it. I'm just saying that ship sailed more than 10 years ago.
I just feel bad for students too, because it feels like that they have gone an entire school year for nothing because they have no grades. And I feel bad for them that they don't at least get a total grade of their first and second trimesters to be their final grade and say, yes, you accomplished something. And that bothers me, that kids feel like that they've attended 2 trimesters for no reason. Their grades don't count for anything. And so that bothers me a lot.
Okay.
You're muted, George.
Sorry.
Can I,
Thank-
sorry,
Yes,
one
go
quick
ahead.
follow-up. This will save me from asking it later. Extended school year for special ed, is that still a thing we do it distance learning? Is that what that's going to look like as well?
Yes, we have plans to move forward with extended school year in a distance learning model.
Thank you.
Very good. So on item 10H, looking for someone to make the motion to approve the resolution.
So moved.
By Mrs. Harvey is the motion, and the second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Miyakawa. Roll call, please.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Hi.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa, Board President Roth.
Aye. That's a 5-0 vote. The motion carries and the resolution is adopted. 10I is the adoption of Board Policy 4112.5 and 4213.5 and 4313.5, working remotely. Looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
We have a motion by Mrs. Harvey and a second by Mrs. Miyakawa. Roll call, please.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay, Board
No,
Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Harvey,
Board President
Board
Harvey?
President Roth.
Oh, that's,
Who made the second? I'm sorry.
yes, aye. That's a 4-1 vote. The motion carries. The board policy is adopted. Item 10.
Aye.
Yes, please.
Excuse me, Mr. Raw. We're having some issues with our volume here. I just wanted to confirm for Velma that on that last vote, it was a 4-1. Was that with Mrs. Lindsay with a no?
Yeah, that is correct. Mrs. Lindsay was the no on that one.
And who seconded that last motion?
Mrs. Miyakawa. Harvey made the motion. Miyakawa the second.
All right, great. Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll move on to item 10J, which is adopt board policy 6157, distance learning. Looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Collins. The second.
Second.
Second is by Mrs. Harvey. Roll call vote, please.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
No.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Roth.
Aye, that's a 4-1 vote. The motion carries. The board policy is adopted. Item 10K is the approval of a declaration of need for fully qualified educators. Ms. Peterson.
Yes, this is an annual declaration of need that we bring for the board's approval each year. And as is explained in the agenda item, deals with the hiring, recruiting, and credentialing of our teachers.
All right. We have a question by Mrs. Lindsay.
Oh, I can't hear you, Mr. Raw. Wait 1 second.
We have a question by Mrs. Lindsay.
Yes, I can hear.
My question for you is, in adopting this policy, isn't this directly opposed to what we're doing as far as bringing in interns that haven't even completed their education, where we're working with people that have no experience? I find that this is kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing because there certainly are not what I would consider qualified.
Yes, Mrs. Lindsay, this is not a policy. This is a requirement, an annual requirement through the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, that if we are not able or successful to find exactly what you just described, that there is a hierarchy or alternatives available to us if there was not a fully credentialed person. And we're required to go through that order in order to hire. We wouldn't start with someone with no experience. We always aim to find the most highly qualified first, and then it gives us a hierarchy to go down.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm looking for a motion to approve item 10K.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Harvey and a second by Mrs. Miyakawa. Roll call vote, please.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Roth.
Aye, that's a 5-0 vote. The motion carries. The item is adopted. Item 10L is our approval of construction funds. Are there any questions by board members on construction funds? Seeing none, looking for a motion to approve the construction fund expenditures.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Harvey and a second. By Mrs. Lindsay. Looking for a roll call vote.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Roth.
Aye, that's a 5-0 vote. The motion carries. The item 10I, or 10K, oh boy, help me. 10L is approved and adopted. We are now on to the consent agenda. All right, let me get my notepad out. We'll start off with Mrs. Miyakawa. Are there any items you need to have questions answered or on a separate vote?
Question on 11D, please.
11D as in dog. Going now to Mrs. Harvey, or Miss Harvey. I didn't marry you tonight, but Miss Harvey. Shoot. Sorry. We're getting a little punchy. So she has no questions. Mr. Collins, are there any items for questions or separate vote? None?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Lindsay, looking for items for different questions or a separate vote. Boy, it must be getting late because I'm having trouble putting my words together.
Yes, 11E.
11E. Okay. Thank you, all of you, because I had 11D and 11E, so that makes life good. So I look for a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda, less items D as in dog and E as in elephant. Looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Mr. Collins makes the motion. The second is made by Mrs. Lindsay. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Collins, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I thought that the board members just had questions. It wasn't.
No, they're going to be separate votes. There'll be
Okay.
separate votes.
Okay. Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Roth.
Aye. That's a 5-0 vote to approve tonight's consent items, less items 11D and 11E. The consent agenda is adopted. We'll start with Mrs. Miyakawa on 11D.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. I just have a clarifying question. In both places I read, both in the agenda and on the Friday update, it mentioned in describing the need to change the job requirements, it kept saying we have a program specialist for special ed, and then it talked about changing the current TOSA into a program specialist for technology. So my question is, I'm not sure why the special ed component was mentioned. From what I'm understanding, those are two separate positions, correct? Is it
That's
just saying
correct.
we're putting in a program specialist for this just as we did for that? Is that kind of what that
Are
was
you gonna
referring
have
to?
the volume on or me? Somebody's got it. Okay. So yes, correct. The program specialist, the reason that was mentioned is there is currently a program specialist job description. It is only for special education. So this is a newly created. Typically for the board, I provide for you the original, the strikeout version, and the new one. And I was letting you know that this is from scratch with all new things. It is an administrative role. That's why it's program specialist, but its sole focus is on supporting teachers and the classroom and educational technology.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dee Dee, I have a question on that. Oh, Mrs. Lindsay, you didn't say 11D.
I know. I'm sorry, I missed it. I just have a comment more than a question. I'm really concerned about creating more positions right now, to be real honest with you. I don't know if this is the time for us to be doing this. If it's just the basically the description of what we're looking for, if we do hire one, that's one thing, but I'm not really running forward to hiring and creating another position when we're in the position we are right now financially. So I would like the board to think seriously about this, because this is just another job that we're going to have to look at.
Okay, that was your comment. Okay, Dee Dee, I have a question. So by approving tonight's position, which I don't really have any issue with the way the item was put together, but do we plan, if we approve tonight, are we planning on hiring for this position? Or is that just, we're just creating this and then should we need it, we'll hire? Are we looking to hire? What's the game plan on this?
So we're bringing for your approval the job description, which is newly created. You're correct. In addition, in the board update that was provided to you by Laura Granger, February 25th, as well as additional information, and as well as what I put in the agenda item, it would be the staff's intent with, and we're looking at that. We know that staffing is something that we're currently looking at closely. This would not be an additional position. We would essentially only post this position for internal candidates only, and whomever was the successful candidate in receiving this, if we were able to fill this position, they would take that position, and then we would look at staffing so that their position that they left would be closed. Or we would work within those paradigms. So we're not asking for an additional administrator. In fact, a lot of the work and in the Friday updates, as well as in the background information for this item, these are pieces that we crucially need. We've been having instructional coaches do pieces of this. We need to expand this. We need them to be able to work the additional days. And when you compare the cost of a teacher who's at a salary of, around 95,000, and you look at the beginning pay scale for this position, and you look at the number of days, it's really about a $3,000 to $4,000 difference increase. So we're not asking for an additional person in this time. We know where we are right now, and we're highly aware of that. It would be our recommendation that we do what I've just explained.
Okay, so that's very helpful, and I appreciate that. So the piece of the puzzle that I'm missing, probably, and Marty could help me with this, or maybe Laura could. I sat down with them and we kind of laid out the org chart for how we were going to deal with technology in the Sylvan School District absent a technology director when we lost our technology director. It would be very helpful to me if we have an org chart that the board could look at to see how are all of these things happening, because we lost the technology director, yet we hired a third party to handle a vast majority of our technology items, but not the educational component, which I'm reading here. So I'm a little foggy of what the org chart looks like in Sylvan District with respect to technology and all the component pieces of technology. Would it be possible that as you're doing this, that we can see what that org chart looks like and who's doing every piece of the technology, whether it's the educational component or the hardware component or the maintain third-party service component? Would that be a possibility, or would that be too big of an ask?
And no, Mr. Ra, I'm going to jump in here. Certainly, we can update the org chart. I know when we met previously, we had shared with you our plans. And then in February at the budget study session, we had also made another proposal. Now that was in advance of our circumstances and certainly in advance of us becoming fully aware of where the budget is. And so at that time in February, we had even talked about a possible shadow for Mrs. Reed is retiring next year. And so we talked about a possible shadow and how would we be able to support the transition. The truth of the matter is that Mrs. Reed works pretty much exclusively now as the director of technology. The expanse of and the integration of technology into all of our classrooms and into all of our workstations, and the fact that we have 9,000 end users on technology has precipitated the need to certainly address that and staff it appropriately. So while Mrs. Reed still does some work around the accountability and those pieces of her previous roles, her primary focus, and we're grateful for this because it's a need and she's done a tremendous job with it, has been on the technology side of things. As we move forward, the org chart that I will share with you based upon what we know since the time we presented the budget study in February will reflect that primary role of hers as the director of technology. It will also reflect that many of those pieces around accountability, program monitoring, some of those I have taken on, some of those Mrs. Crothers is taking on because of her role of assessment. So we are looking at all of those pieces, especially in light of Mrs. Reed, retirement on the horizon. The other piece is that the other part of Marty's role has been primarily around systems management. She is the glue that sticks together all of the pieces between all of the departments. So all of those interworkings between ARES and CalPads and inventory systems and on and on and on it goes, certify, all of these pieces. She is the glue that sticks all of those pieces together. So she is often running interference between each department to try and keep all of these things in place because it's all about systems management. So what we anticipate the organization showing is that in light of her retirement, we would have a structure and we would be very, very clear on that role as the director of technology. Still, that does not take away from our partnership with DataPath as our third party because they are handling infrastructure. And it's not that Mrs. Reed doesn't work as a liaison with them because she does, and she manages the tech ticket system and all of those pieces related to end user and workstations and those kinds of things. But we're happy to provide that reorganization for you.
Great, that will be helpful to a board member who is not in the day-to-day operations of the school district. To just see how all the component pieces, because I know technology is very complex and there's lots of different fingers. And it sounds like we've spread those fingers apart for a while. We're trying to now consolidate. It would pictorially, it would be easy for a board to look at and see how is this flowing. So I look forward to seeing that. And then also, not to discuss now, but I know that you were pretty close to the end of your technology plan. I'm hoping that that's, and I know you're busy and I'm not going to add it to you, but it was almost at the finish line. It was like right there at the finish line.
So close.
I don't want it to be lost because there was a lot of good work that you and a lot of people put into that. So it'd be nice if that at some time could be finished off. And I don't know. Anyway, I'll just throw that out. But anyway, based upon Ms. Peterson's answer, I can fully support this item based upon the way she answered the question. So yes, Mrs. Lindsay.
I have a question. Would this be an item that possibly we could postpone until we have a chance to see that chart? Because to be really honest with you, I don't see that we're in any panic. We have a year before Mrs. Reed leaves. And I would also like to be able to see that chart and see if there's anything that the board can put some input into before we make that decision to set up this job and this job description, because it sounds like that maybe there might be somebody already in the makings to go into that position. And I would like to see that chart before we actually vote on it.
So,
Ms. Peterson, how would you respond to that? Or is it you, Mrs. Granger? Whose department is this?
well, you
Both
know,
of yours. Okay.
We're double
Yours,
trouble all the
Marty.
time.
we share a lot. We share a lot.
Okay.
So,
Go for it.
We're very collaborative here in
That's fine.
Sylvan, very collaborative.
Good.
We model
Love
it at all the levels.
Good.
So I'm happy to answer that, Mrs. Lindsay. Yes, I can get that organization chart to you, but here's my recommendation. In light of where we are with the changing, ever-changing and evolving landscape around distance learning, this particular role around educational technology has taken on a significant importance, probably more so than we even thought was possible. And that's hard to believe because we've been advocating for this need. And certainly, and Mr. Rock can speak to this, the tech committee recognized this need as well. Many of these functions are currently being performed by an instructional coach, but the intensity and the need to have additional days to do this, besides where the beginning of school starts and the end of school starts, necessitates that we really address that. And so that we are fully prepared when school resumes, whatever it may look like, to have technology prepared, to have devices prepared, to have teachers prepared, to have everything set up and prepared. That includes licensing, security, safety, all of those things. And they're not simple, flips of switches. They require quite a bit of management on large platforms and large portfolios and scapes in order to have these licenses and things ready. So it is our recommendation that we don't delay in making the switch. Again, the financial impact is minimal, and I know at a budget time, all financial impact is important and should be considerate. So I don't want to minimize.
And I am not questioning any aspect of what you just said. What I'm asking is, because you have three things here, you have the program specialist, the education services, and technology. You're focusing in on technology. Do we really want a policy that include, or a job description that includes all three of those things, when maybe technology needs to be in a separate column in that chart? I'm just, if we pass this and then you get the job and it doesn't work, then we're going to have to come back and recreate the situation. So I'm not sure that we're not kind of getting the cart before the horse here.
Okay, so I think part of there's a blending as we're talking between Marty's position as a director and this position. The title program specialist is just the
Whose
title.
position?
This position is program specialist is just the title. It's like saying assistant principal or director or vice principal. Program specialist is just the name. The actual function of the job is the ed services technology. That's the function of the job. So program specialist is just the title, like assistant principal. I think as we're talking, we're trying to explain, because we're referring back to the organizational chart, we're talking about Marty's position, which is the director of, as we affectionately call her, the director of the kitchen sink and all things we need. And she's amazing at it. This is completely separate from that. And this position would actually be supervised by the assistant superintendent of ed services and would be a program specialist whose function is to work within ed services, but the focus is on educational technology.
Okay, so they would be under Laura then.
They would be, this person would be under Laura. That's correct.
Okay, and they would work on the special ed programming and technology?
No, not special ed. They would only be working on educational technology.
Okay, so special education does not have any aspect for special ed.
They have
Okay.
their own program specialists that are just for special education. The full focus of this position is to support our teachers, to support our students, and to support our classroom with everything that's now integrated, completely blended, and embedded between technology and learning.
Well, I'll vote yes on it. I'm not opposed. I'm just asking you guys if we're not ahead of ourselves, because I really feel that each of these are going to end up being vital and important positions, and we're going to have one person running around being pulled from two different directions. And so if that's what you guys want to do, that's okay with me.
All right, so what we've asked staff is we've got a clarification of what the job position is. Dee Dee's done a great job in explaining that we're not adding a new person. But it is a slight increase to the budget by $3,000 or $4,000, I think she said. Maybe I got that wrong, and that staff would get to us as soon as possible an org chart so we can see how technology is going to function in the Sylvan Union School District. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and move forward with looking for a motion to approve. And we are dealing with 11D on the consent agenda, looking for a motion to approve. Anybody willing to do that?
So moved.
We have a motion by Mrs. Harvey, or Miss Harvey. I keep trying to marry her tonight. And a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Miyakawa. Roll call vote, please.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Aye.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Member Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Ross.
Aye, that's a 5-0 vote. The motion carries. The item is adopted. Our final voting item tonight is item 11E. It's the shade structure over at Orchard. I had an issue with it, and was it Miyakawa or Lindsay that had an issue with it?
Lindsay.
Did you want to go or you want me to go on this one? I don't
Mrs. Lindsay.
first.
But I don't know who was involved in it.
Oh, it's just, I think only you and I have questions on it. Let me just throw a question out. I guess it would be, I'm not sure who it is. I guess Mrs. Aguilar, I guess. My concern on this particular item is it's a $24,000 item. It's paid by the PTA. It wasn't really clear in the document, number one, whether that $24,000 included all the other costs, including installation. And that's a big thing. But my really double big whammy question is that this is a cloth roof. And that thing is going to deteriorate after a few years. Who's going to replace that cloth roof? And shouldn't we make it a hard surface roof? I just don't see, I would hate to look 5 or 10 years from now and go to Orchard and see a bunch of sticks there, but no cloth roof anymore because no one's got the money, and we find out a cloth roof costs $15,000 to put a cloth over it. And so we all go, we don't got the money, and PTA doesn't have the money. So now we have this albatross out there. I'm having a hard time with this cloth roof. Sorry, but
Those are great questions, Mr. Raw, and I do have
Yeah.
answers to your questions.
okay, you can answer now that I went off, and then Mrs. Lindsay can chime in with her questions after.
Very good. So yes, it does include installation. So that is your first question.
Yeah.
That was part of the quote and part of the piggyback pricing
Okay.
that we got. The cloth roof comes with a 10-year warranty, and the cost of replacement typically runs $400 to $1,000, depending on the size of it. From what the architects have shared, because SKW is involved in this as they are required to be, the fabric or the ones that are hard surface are about 2 to 4 times more expensive than the cloth, which is why this is an alternative that's often used by districts and used by many districts in our area over the past several years, and they report they have not had issues with them. And you also had asked about some kind of a district policy. We don't have a policy to our knowledge, stating what specific type of a product we would use with this.
Okay. I thought we had a policy because when I'm remembering back, and some of you old timers on there with me, remember when we had this issue with the monkey bars and the bark underneath, and we started with sand, and then we went to wood chips, and then we went to rubber pads, and then we went to rubber bark, and then we went to, it was like the evolution of how to fall and not hurt yourself. And I remember at the time, I thought we had a standard in the district for how we were going to deal with donations from the PTAs when they want to put an item at a school site, and then who's going to maintain that item in perpetuity.
I can talk a little bit about that.
I thought that existed. And so when I saw that it had a cloth roof, I was thinking, ooh, golly, this seems like something that's going to deteriorate over time, and who's going to maintain it? That's my concern. And that's why I thought about the policy. I see Mrs. Hendricks waving. Maybe she remembers this. I don't know.
I do remember, because there was more than one conversation, and the board went back and forth, because there was the thought that yes, the PTA, because at one time PTAs were only purchasing the equipment and the board was owning the expense of installation. So the board said no, if there's going to be a donation with equipment such as equipment or shade structure, the entity has to come up with the full amount to purchase it and install it. But then the second part of this conversation, and I remember it vividly, and Mrs. Miyakawa, you might as well, we looked at each other and said, okay, well, here they're willing to gift the district playground equipment, shade structure. Are we going to say no to that? And the board said, no, we're not going to say no to that. We're going to accept it. And then we do know that with that takes on some of the responsibility of the district, because it does. Like if you put a slide in and 15 years later the slide breaks, most of the time we either take the slide off and remove it and there's no more slide, or PT comes up with another slide. Typically that's what happens. But that's my memory from conversation.
Okay, very good. So Mrs. Lindsay, did you have an additional question? Can't hear you.
You're muted, Mrs. Lindsay.
I am.
Oh, you're good now.
Oh, I can vouch for the last comment, Mrs. Hendricks. Usually when they break, they usually get removed. They rarely get replaced. We did have a couple of shade structures at USTAC because of the big, horrible, hot area over there. And when they disintegrated, the poles and everything went out. So what I was going to suggest was that if the replacement top is only about $1,000 and you think it's about double that, why don't we throw in the extra 1,000 and put in a hard top?
I think 2 to 4 times for the whole structure.
No, the cost of a hard roof structure would be 2 to 4 times as much. So 50 or 100,000 versus a $25,000 structure cost.
A whole different framework is what you're saying then.
Yes, a whole different
Okay.
cost. Is
Okay.
probably a good chunk of that is additional fees and engineering and architect involvement, because all that, is also part of the cost. The overall cost is just under 34,000 with the DSA fees and architect costs that are required and go along with this.
Okay,
Right.
then may I suggest that the board consider purchasing a spare canvas top to have in storage in case this one rips, because you can guarantee down the road it's going to cost 3 times or 4 times what it's going to cost today. So if the board is going in that direction of putting that kind of a shade up, perhaps we should go ahead and purchase a one and have it kept over in maintenance for just in case it does rip.
Mrs. Lindsay, this has a 10-year warranty.
Well, a lot of things don't last 10 years, even though they did.
Mrs. Miyakawa had a question or a comment.
I'm sorry, I just had,
Okay, I guess I'm finished.
I think just to finish what you're saying, Ms. Aguilar is saying that they would be required to replace it within those 10 years. So if we were to buy a new one, it'd have to sit in storage for 10 years and then be replaced after that, I think is what she was saying. Mine was, apart from that, I'm sorry, it's just a clarifying question. The $24,000, does that include payment to our architect?
No, that is additional on top of that.
So that's not what we're voting on right now.
This is just the contract with USA Shade for the structure and the installation.
Okay.
Do you have any idea, Lizette, how much that architects are going to cost?
The total project cost is about just under 34,000, and PTA is funding all of it.
You're muted.
Mr. Raw, you're still muted.
Me?
No, Mr. Raw.
So you said that additional 10,000 PTA is going to fund also?
That is correct. They're funding all of that. They're also planning on, they're raising funds for a second structure next school year.
Good for them.
All right. Any other further questions?
I have no questions, but I'd like to make a motion to approve.
All right. Mr. Collins made a motion to approve.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Harvey. Do a roll call vote.
Board Member Collins,
Aye.
Board Member Lindsay,
Hi.
Board Member Harvey,
Aye.
Board Vice President Miyakawa,
Aye.
Board President Ross.
Reluctantly, no. But the item passes anyway. On a 4-1 vote, the item passes and is adopted. Superintendent's report.
Yes, so technically we have 8 days left for the school year. However, next week our students will be, they're scheduled with a very detailed schedule for a few parents at a time to come to school, drop off devices, and pick up any personal items that might have been left in lockers or desks of any sort. So our principals have done an amazing job of orchestrating that. Teachers came this week and packed up with social distancing, only a few teachers on campus at one given time. So that was a lot of work. I have to give kudos to Mrs. Granger and her team for developing the plan, and then the principals executed it brilliantly. I want to also say that our middle school staff has done an amazing job at each middle school putting together a beautiful virtual promotion for our students, and you will get a copy of that as soon as that's ready to go out. It's, I've gotten a hint of some of the things, and you're going to be very impressed. All of our 8th graders are receiving a promotion certificate. And we also, our principals worked really hard to make something happen, and I don't want to spoil the treat, but there's going to be an item that each eighth grader will take home with them and get to display at their home, and that's all I can say right now. So I'm really excited that our principals and staff have really wanting to make this as special as possible, even though, you know, we would love to have had our regular promotion, but we're just not able to. Upcoming agenda items, you're going to have an LCAP hearing, a budget hearing, and interfund transfers.
Thank you very much. Mr. Collins asked for a minute or two before we adjourn. So Mr. Collins, go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Roth, for your indulgence. I appreciate it. I know the meeting's late, so I'll try to keep this very brief, but I would like to share something very personal and that's very alive for me right now. I have had the privilege and the pleasure of serving on this board for 12.5 years. And after several months of prayerful consideration and despite some mixed feelings, I have decided to not seek re-election at the end of this year when my term expires. My intention in announcing this now is to give any interested people a healthy amount of time to ask if service to the Sylvan District is right for them and to consider running for office. This opportunity is obviously open to all, but it is my hope that this will be a good chance to bring an active Sylvan parent presence to the board because that perspective is truly very important. The work of a trustee is to make good decisions, and the best decisions are made by people who have a servant's heart, who are well-informed and prepared to listen with the compassionate heart of a learner in all circumstances. So until December, when the sun sets on my time here, you can expect me to carry on as I always have. I will offer everything I can to help our staff, our students, and our families navigate the education side of this current crisis. But I am looking forward to celebrating our fantastic superintendent. And I am also looking forward to welcoming our next fantastic superintendent in the meantime. If any of you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me by phone or email. I appreciate and respect and care about you all more than I can say at this time. So thank you very much for your kindness.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. We're going to miss you. And we appreciate 12.5 years is a long period of time. And we really appreciate your heartfelt compassion and your service of the school district. And you got six months to sprint to the finish. So we expect to see some pretty good things. And don't just rely on those Star Trek jokes, okay?
So I've got way more than just Star Trek jokes.
Oh, I know. And that's a little scary. But we appreciate you. Folks, thank you for joining. I know this seems a little out of character that I took you so close to 10 o'clock, but I encourage you all to click the X on your screen and then head to the refrigerator and enjoy your evening. Thank you all for all your dedicated service tonight and all the good work you did. And bless each one of you, and good night.
George, do we need to talk about those dates? The governance dates?
Well, yeah, if you want, the only date that we need to really talk about is the superintendent's retreat. The budget study session, we'll make that decision amongst staff. So it's just really the spring retreat. Now, traditionally that retreat is a goal-setting retreat, and I would just recommend that we do that with the new superintendent because it will be his goals. And so to have it prior to him coming on board would be to set goals for him that he had no input on.
Right. Can someone help me remember what we decided to do? Because we talked about this a few meetings ago and I'm the one that brought it. I can't remember what we said, but remember how we said we were going to try and set that closer to, David, you'll remember, but closer to after CSBA, like January or February instead of May, because we were going to do it when it was still fresh on our minds. Didn't we say that?
Yes.
January, February.
That we
Bella, what do you
Well,
there were two,
January
the
instead of
discussion,
September.
yeah, the discussion was, do we move a retreat or do we add a retreat?
Oh, right. What did we decide? I can't remember.
I think we should just move this one, but I don't think we need to move it that far because the first 6 months, it states in his contract that we have to judge him based upon his goals. So I would say that within the first month or two after he gets here, he needs to lay out his goals.
But I believe his contract says the goals have to be set in June, by June.
That's true, but his contract actually doesn't become effective until July 1. So, you know, we can play the technicality game here, but I think that we would set them in July. I think that would be reasonable so that he could help set those goals. And we work out a time that works for everybody here. And I would have a chat with him when he feels he can help us put together those goals so he can be working on those for the first 6 months.
So we do it in July this year, but then in the future, it
I
would
think
be
then we can
January?
change it. But he needs to have something to be working for the first several months of his tenure here.
And I would honestly, I would question if he'll be ready to do that in July in the first 4 weeks. That seems, yeah, that seems a little soon, but
I would venture that a person as good, as ambitious as him, he's going to kind of have a lot of direction on what he's going to want to accomplish in his first 12 months of being on the job. And I'm assuming that those will be his goals. And we just would need to ratify them. But I think every person who comes into a new job, they don't want to squander that first 12 months. That's how they want to be remembered. So I'll work with him on coming up with a date and see when he feels he can come up with his goals by.
Okay.
Yeah, Cindy. I can't hear a word you're saying.
You're muted still, Cindy.
I don't know what's happening. Oh, well. Good night.
Okay. All right. And then the other meetings will agendize based upon information from the state.
Okay.
So, all right. Very good. Thank you, folks.
Can you hear me now?
Everyone.
All right. Good night.
thank you. Good night.